Hello everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to be profiling Mutants, as you can see. Mutants is a really interesting deck. It's one that I find myself always being drawn back to in one way or another. I do need to play it at more local events though. It's one that I don't often play, but moving forward I definitely want to try and take it to more events as I'm always testing with the deck on and off, and like I said, I'm always drawn back to it, and it's a deck that I actually really enjoy playing. So I'll get into the deck profile. A lot of it's fairly standard. There's a couple of more interesting things that I'm trying out, but we'll get into the list. So to start off with the small mutants, we're playing 3 MO5, 3 ST46, and I'm playing 3 of the new Mutant. So if you're not sure about what these cards do, MO5 on summon searches a mutant monster, ST46 on summon searches a spell trap, and then the new mutant can special summon itself if you control a mutant card. And then they all have the same second effect, except Mutant's effect is slightly different, but they tribute themselves and banish a card from hand or face-up field. Mutant banishes from hand or deck instead. And then you summon the appropriate monster. So if you banish a monster, you summon Beast. If you banish a spell, you summon Mist. And if you banish a trap, you summon Arsenal. You can see I'm running 2 Beast. That's because Beast is the best of the bigger level 8 mutants. Essentially, Beast is a spell negate. Arsenal banishes a monster if a monster is activated. Monster effect is activated on your opponent's field. Arsenal banishes a monster on the field by banishing a card from hand or field, and then Mist, if your opponent activates a trap or effect, Mist can banish a card to draw 2. It doesn't come up all that often, but depending on, I guess, your local area, if you've got lots of trap decks, then Mist can come up to draw 2. So that's the mutant monsters that we're playing. The little ones are all psychic, which is relevant with E-Telly now being at 3. I'm playing 1 Recover. This is one of my more interesting choices. Now, the thing that I find in my testing of mutants is that your big mutants' floating effects is rarely turned on. So if you're unaware of how they work, I've mentioned their main effect, but each mutant has an effect that deals with spells, traps, and monsters. So Beast cannot be targeted by monsters, Mist cannot be targeted by spells, and Arsenal cannot be targeted by traps. And then if this is destroyed by your opponent's card, add back a banished mutant trap, Mist adds back a banished mutant monster, and Arsenal adds back a banished mutant spell on its destruction. But often you find yourselves, depending on, and this is just in my testing, often I find myself not with enough banished mutants. Obviously the little ones banish cards from hand, but usually the cards you're banishing from hand are typically ones that you'd rather keep. That's where something like Mutant is really handy because it can banish from decks. So you can banish resources that you'd like to recur. So a combo line that you might play that comes up quite often. This is why I'm playing 3 Mutant. I've seen a lot of lists only playing 1 or 2. I'm playing 3 just because it comes up with Recover, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But for example, if you've opened one of the original mutants and the new mutant, and you've got access to Beast, because Beast is always the priority. So you would use your ST46, banish it, tribute itself, banish a monster, summon the Beast. Mutant can summon itself to the field, and specifically depending on what you have in your hand, I'm often banishing a trap just because Arsenal is the next best one as a disruption, and you can banish the trap that best suits what you want to do in the next turn. Because Beast, when it's destroyed, will recur that trap. So you'll end, if you open these 2, and you might have other trap cards and things in your hand, and ST46 specifically can search you for something, but these 2 set you up for Arsenal and Beast when it's destroyed, recurs the trap. Arsenal, when it's destroyed, recurs a spell, but we're not often banishing spells. And when we are banishing spells, they're not in situations where Arsenal's on the field. So the recurring effects are sometimes hard to pull off, but that's where Recover comes in. So obviously Recover, as I'm sure you would assume, is an E-Telly target. And I'm playing a lot of starters in this deck. So the 9 small mutants, 3 E-Telly, plus there's a mutant trap card that I'll get to in a little bit. We've got a lot of starters, but sometimes you can get to hands, you can draw hands where you've got too many starters. If you have too many of those starters and E-Telly, you can instead go for Recover. And what Recover is in the deck to do is to bring out Shen Shen. Now, Shen Shen obviously is a strong card. It's a permanent D-shifter, essentially, as long as it's on the field. And it's really good because your traps and your spells, specifically the mutant ones, you'd rather have them banished. So having access to something like Shen Shen is really great. So on any hand where you can set up double level 8 mutant, if you've got E-Telly as well, which is, it's technically a 3-card combo, I suppose, but when you've got the E-Telly as well, turning one of them into Shen Shen is really strong if your back row is good enough, if you've got specifically mutant cards. For example, Mutant Cry, Mutant Expansion, they're both really great cards that you'd want to be recurring with Beast upon destruction. Specifically Cry, because Cry keeps your engine going. But yeah, so if you can access Shen Shen, you're not always doing it on turn 1, sometimes it's turn 3, but I just think Shen Shen is just a really insane card that is really good in mutants because it banishes all your cards and you don't really care about them not being in the graveyard anymore. When we get to Extra Deck, you'll see it as well, but we're also playing the Sword Soul level 10. This comes up with the Mutant level 9 Fusion, which you're often summoning as well, and Chen Ying is just a house. You're banishing cards left, right, and center. So when it's good, it's good. When it comes up, it's great. So we're adding a bit of a synchro element with Recover. And it's just something that I've been testing. Shen Shen, when it comes up, is amazing. Shen Shen is recurable as well, and you do play lots of different types and attributes, so you don't really have any issue recurring Shen Shen. We then have 3 Shifter as the last monster, and this is one of the biggest appeals to this deck, is that Shifter is obviously the best hand trap in the game, and you are able to do so much with it, and it shuts down the meta. Plus, like I said with Shen Shen, you want your cards banished, so Shifter is a must. For the spells, 3 Pot of Extravagance. Extravagance is really good because you draw cards, and the mutants generally are not very economic in terms of their summoning and their effects to summon the big mutants. So Extravagance is really good to just maintain cards in hand, plus help search more trap cards or draw into trap cards that are strong. 3 E-Telly, it's at 3, so we play it at 3, and like I said, in the hands where you've got E-Telly plus a couple of starters that you don't necessarily need, you can just go for Shen Shen, and Shen Shen is great. The last 2 spells, we're playing 1 Evolution Lab and 1 Mutant Fusion. Evolution Lab is something that I'm dabbling with at 2, because it, with the Mutant is really good, because Mutant can banish something like ST46. Evolution Lab can summon back the ST46, and then you can get a second level 8, and you've just got more bodies to play with. But it's interesting at the moment. I'm just going to leave it at 1 for now, but definitely in the future I could see myself bumping it to 2. I believe the list at the moment is 41 cards. Because you do run a decent number of bricks, because the level 8s in hand are essentially bricks, and the Recover is not something you really want in your hand. You could play 42, especially because as well we're playing so many starters that 42 is not really going to hit consistency in any significant way. And the Mutant Fusion is really good as a one-off. You search it when you need it. But essentially, if your opponent has activated a card or effect during your turn, it becomes a lot better. So it's just there for plays where it does come up. And when it does resolve, it's really good. For the traps, we're playing 3 Cry and 2 Mutant Expansion. Mutant Cry is a fusion spell, or fusion trap. During the main phase, it shuffles back monsters from field, graveyard, or face-up banished to fusion summon. This is your grind game, essentially. Mutant Cry helps you to recur your monsters back into deck, specifically the level 8s. You kind of want them in deck to be able to access with your small mutants, and then going towards turn 3, turn 5, because you're playing a slower game, you can eventually bring out Ultimus, which is quite strong and usually winning the game by that point. Expansion on activation summons a level 4 or lower mutant from deck, or you can add it to your hand. This is really good because this allows you to again, it's a starter in a sense in that you can set it and it works with your other trap cards that we're playing. But it's a way that you keep the engine going with ST46. So essentially, the play style of the deck, the way I play it at least, is to use the main two mutants, MO5 and ST46, to continuously loop each other. And then based on my hand, I can search different things, because these two can not infinitely recycle themselves, but each turn you can access engine through these. So MO5 naturally searches ST46. So if MO5 was your first normal summon for your turn, you can search the ST46 for next turn, and then you've already got a small mutant. You kind of always want a small mutant to be able to play the game. ST46 on the normal summon searches a mutant spell trap. Typically what I would do, and this is where you have to make some decisions, but your two best options are Cry and Expansion, and then obviously Evolution Lab and Fusion I've mentioned already, but these are your main two search targets. But what you have to kind of ask yourself is, do I have access to my next turn's play? And if you do, you would search Cry, because Cry puts more offensive pressure on the field by summoning the Synthesis Fusion. But then if you don't have a way to play on the next turn, you would search Expansion, because Expansion represents you being able to continue playing the game. So the mutants through these three cards allow you to kind of continuously have plays each turn, which you really do want. And then, yeah, you decide if you've already got, for example, if you open up double of one of these, then you don't need to search Expansion because you've already got a play, and that's when you would search Cry and be able to put on some more pressure. And then you rely on some of your other trap cards and Dimension Shifter to be able to be the offensive pressure for your opponent to slow them down. Going then into just the generic traps, playing just all good cards. There can be only one. We can play under this fairly well. The only conflict occurs with the Fusion, which is a psychic, as well as the small mutants being a psychic as well. So there's a conflict there. Shen being a psychic does have conflictions as well, but we can still work around it to some extent. So there can be only one, obviously, is a big blowout against a lot of the meta decks though. So that's more or less why we're playing it, and we can play better around it than I think a lot of the meta decks can. So we play it. Then we're playing Strike, because Strike is great. 3 Torrential and then Imperm. Now Imperm is pretty self-explanatory. It's good going second as well if we need to, but Torrential is an interesting one. I'm not sold on Torrential. I'd love to play a card like Ice Dragon's Prison, but more often than not, we want our opponent to not have anything in the graveyard, because we should be banishing their resources. Hopefully, ideally, we have Shifter. So Ice Dragon's Prison is interesting, but sometimes we just have situations where our opponent has nothing. The other issue with Torrential is it kind of destroys our monsters, our level 8 monsters, which don't recur if we destroy them. Now, sometimes that doesn't matter, because there's often situations where we don't have the banished mutant card to recur with the specific monster. So for example, we might have Beast on the field, but we won't have any banished mutant traps. And so Torrential's fine in those situations, but it's just an interesting one. Obviously, we're going to play it at the moment just because it is such a blowout. And I think that's more important because we are a trap deck, we're a slower deck. We kind of need those cards where we are able to turn the tide of the duel. So Torrential is important for that, I think. And if we're playing a game where we always have a small mutant in hand to summon, then nuking the board is fine. Going then into the extra decks, that's the main deck. I think it's 41. Potentially the 42nd card would be something like the second Evolution Lab. The extra deck is mostly obviously leaning towards Extravagance. There are a couple of proxies. I'm currently out with COVID, unfortunately, but once those cards come in, then I can go to locals and these cards should be in the mail by then. So playing 3 Ultimus. I'm used to playing Ultimateness in Drytron, but Ultimus, we're playing 3. 3 does not come up, but you kind of want to have 1 sitting around in your extra deck at some point to be able to put on the field and kind of just close out the game. Synthesis, this is your best fusion, and this is the one downside to playing something like Extravagance, is you kind of really need Synthesis, because Cry is your essential piece of recursion, your main recursion. So that's the one issue with Extravagance, is that you can banish your Synthesis, but Extravagance is just so good. You kind of need to play it. I've seen other people mention things like Magician Souls, because you're already running Mist, which is a brick and it's a spellcaster, but I don't know. I think Extravagance is just really good, so we're going to play it. That's 3 Shen, only because we don't really need the extra deck, and if Shen comes up, it's great. Just one of the Sword Soul level 10. This rarely comes up, if at all. You could definitely play more of it if you really wanted to. You could max it out at 3, because the extra deck it's not really that relevant. I'm playing double Dingirsu just because it's a strong rank 8 that we can definitely make with our level 8s. And then the last 3 cards, we're just playing the Draglubian package. Draglubian, Harbinger, Numeron. You're rarely, if ever, pulling this off, but it's just a OTK button that you've got access to if you don't banish the materials using Extravagance. But let's do a few test hands just so you can kind of see. I'm not going to really play them out all that often. Well, there's not much to play out, but we'll do some test hands and see what we get. Okay, so for test hand number 1, just for the proxy situation, just so it's clear, this is going to be Ultimus, and then the blank is just going to be the Shen. So we have MO5, Mutant, Solemn Strike, Dimension Shifter, and E-Telly. Well, oh, there we go. This here is the Shen combo that I was kind of explaining. In this hand, though, you would strongly consider whether or not you want to go for Shen, because we've already got Shifter, so obviously we're going to start with Shifter. This hand is very simply normal MO5. MO5 is always searching ST46, not always, but generally speaking, because ST46, again, lets us to continue playing the game. From here, we would make the decision. Now, MO5 banishing ST46 is going to give us access to Beast. Mutant is going to give us access to Banished Cry, which is awesome. What we then decide, so we'll do this. So we'll go MO5, we'll Tribute, we'll banish ST46, and we will summon out the Beast. We can special Mutant and use its effect. MO5 is banished, Mutant vanishes, and it banishes from Decker's cost. So Cry is really good. If we were to have access to Cry now, we would be able to, we can recur Cry with Beast. So if our opponent outs Beast, then we get to recur it, and that's going to summon Arsenal from the deck. Now, in this situation, do you want access to Shen? Maybe, maybe not. That's what you would decide. E-Telly represents, obviously, being able to continue playing the game. The other thing you could do in this hand, so if you decide you don't want Shen, we take 3k for summoning this, because that's the restriction on Mutant. The other thing we could do in this specific hand, if we decide we don't want to go for Shen, because we've already got Shifter on board and we'd rather search and have a bit more of a disruption, is... no, don't worry, it's not gonna change that. We'll leave it there. So we'll hold E-Telly as our follow-up for next turn. We'll just set Strike. So it obviously doesn't look super strong. E-Telly is going to represent our ability to continue playing the game on the next turn. The other thing that we could do with E-Telly, for example, is we could use it to summon out ST46. For example, we probably wouldn't do this, but we can summon ST46, use it to search something like Cry. This just allows us to put the maximum number of disruptions on the board. That's going to get banished. We could set the Cry, so we'd have Cry and Strike set. This means that we're going to have access now to Synthesis on the following turn. And if we were to do this, we might not, because we're putting all of our resources on the board here, and if this gets outed, we're just in a lot of trouble, more or less, depending on how they out Arsenal and Beast. But the other thing we could do is with Mutant, if we decided we were going to go down this play and leave ST46 on board to search Cry, is we probably don't banish Cry. We probably actually banish the expansion. That way we can recur that as well, because Beast will recur that if it's destroyed. And once we've used Cry, so hypothetically if we were to kind of play out how this would all go, we would... we don't want to... the big ones can banish themselves or any other face-up card on the field, or from your hand. We obviously got no hand at the moment, but what we would kind of do is use the Arsenal, for example, to banish the ST46 to banish the monster. Beast can banish Arsenal. That leaves Arsenal on board to recur the trap. Cry can put back Arsenal and ST46 just because we've burned 2 of them to summon out Synthesis. On summon, Synthesis pops a card, which is great. This Cry is going to get banished. And then going into the next turn, if these both get outed by destruction, so they hypothetically, let's say everything gets outed, but these get specifically destroyed, Beast recurs a trap, so we probably recur Cry, and Synthesis recurs a mutant card. Now ST46 is the best one to recur, and so we just recur that, for example, and then on the next turn we would draw, and we didn't shuffle the deck, but even if the board gets outed, you can see that we do have plays on the next turn. But that was probably really greedy to do that. Probably not ideal to just throw everything on the field. Probably want to play that a bit more conservative. But the issue obviously with the mutants is that you could see in that test hand that they are not economic on your hand size at all. Yeah. And that's kind of where Evolution Lab kind of helps out, because if you have something like MO5 and ST46, you can use ST46, banish the MO5, bring it back with the Evolution Lab. Now this hand is really not that good, not good at all. We opened up 3 kind of one-offs. Fortunately, in this exact situation, we can actually use Fusion to fuse these 2 bricks and summon out Synthesis, but the Synthesis on its own is not winning us the game at all, because we don't get to pop anything anyway. We're setting to Imperm, and we are losing, so not really accomplishing anything with that hand. Okay, third one. Okay, so this hand feels really nice. Obviously I've opened up 2 bricks, but in the grand scheme of things, the bricks don't matter too much because we can just banish them with MO5. So in this hand, we will be obviously dropping Shifter, normal summoning MO5, searching our follow-up for next turn, which is going to be ST46. And then what we're going to do is tribute, banish, summon out the Beast from the deck, and set there can be only one. And so what we're kind of hoping here is that between Beast, D-Shifter, there can be only one, that this is enough. Beast, in this situation, we can probably just banish the recover, or we can banish that there can be only one if we find out we're against a deck that doesn't really care too much about it. But yeah, that's that hand. Pretty self-explanatory. We'll just do one last one. Okay, So this hand's awesome. If something like the Mutant was specifically E-Telly, this is the kind of hand where I would go for Shen, because we've got follow-up. The opening Evolution Lab is really strong in this instance. So MO5 with Evolution Lab is really great. Mutant with Evolution Lab is really great. And honestly, it's just more reasons why I might want to play it at 2. But what we could do with this hand is normal MO5. This is a fairly straightforward Mutant play, even before Mutant was a card. But we can search ST46. Then we can tribute and banish the ST46 to summon Beast. Because then Evolution Lab brings back ST46 and gets its search. Now again, we are asking ourselves, do we have follow-up? Yes, we do. We've got expansion and Mutant. So we're going to search for Cry. And then we can, because we've already got the follow-up through expansion, we might even consider using Evolution Lab to put back Mutant to draw a card. And we've drawn into a Torrential, so that's nice. We can then tribute off the ST46, banishing the Evolution Lab to summon Mist. And this is why when we have E-Telly, it's in this situation, it's really nice because Mist, more often than not, is useless. It just represents a big body that can put a lot of pressure on in terms of damage, but other than that, it's banish fodder for Beast. But if we had E-Telly specifically in this hand, I would 100% be turning it into Shen because Shen actually represents a threat, whereas the Mist is not a threat at all. With this hand, obviously, we're just setting 4 and passing to our opponent. The follow-up is here in expansion. Cry puts back monsters to summon out the Synthesis on our opponent's turn, which is representing a pop as well. So spell negate, banish, solemn strike, torrential. This again, we're probably going to try and save the torrential because we don't really want to cut off everything here. But we can afford to because expansion will continue us playing the next turn. Yeah. Other than that, we'll just leave that there. The last thing I'll just quickly add, and I should have added it earlier in the video, but if you're still here and you hear it, you can hear it. But one thing I wanted to have tried with the deck is the Punk engine, which makes the deck a lot more kind of combo centric because again, E-Telly with the Punk engine, you're using the Punk engine to set up Savage and Shen for pretty much nothing. Does cost cards in hand, but then you can follow up with a normal summon of MO5 and you're kind of off to the races there. So it's probably it's an easier way to Shen. You don't have to open up more cards than necessary, but running the 5 bricks that you needed, because you needed the run to Despot 0-1, the 2 ZM and the 1 Foxy Tune, and the 1 Creation Resonator. So the 5 bricks really just isn't kind of worth it. And then you don't play Extravagance because you kind of want the extra deck to be there. So it's a higher ceiling, but just not as efficient in terms of your cards. But other than that, that's the deck. Hope you enjoyed.